industrial complex. Because many of these NGOs, it's obviously aided by Western European money and at times by EU money. And they operate in, say, the West Bank, and they impose also an agenda on Palestinians. And I think this is very dangerous, because when we talk about networking, it is very important to be clear that we want networking based on community-based networking, not NGO-based networking. Because NGOs, by the time become sort of an opium, and NGOs also have political aims. It's not true that NGOs are just innocent type of saviors who want to make the world a beautiful place. It's definitely not new. They have their own agendas behind them, and many times they aim to make the resistance less radical, to change the discourse from a discourse about decolonization and liberation into a discourse about human rights, about equality. We are not in the stage of having a discourse about human rights. We still are occupied and colonized. When we finish the movement, the process of decolonizing, then I can accept the discourse of human rights. Just, to end, I think that this struggle and this, to understand the difference between networking and solidarity is not exclusive to Palestine. It happens in many places, and especially happens, for example, also in Syria. Unfortunately, the Syrian uprising was ignored by this conference for some reason. But Syrians also had to deal with this, especially after the revolution. They had to deal with this growing NGO complex. Because after the liberation, or after the regime has lost its control on some parts of Syria, especially northern Syria, many NGOs started, many Western NGOs funded few projects in northern Syria and started organizing conferences about transitional justice, about empowering women. Now, we see this all the time. Why would a Western or a white man or someone from the global north come to me or to a Syrian and teach her and lecture her about transitional justice? A martyr's mother knows much more about transitional justice than all these academians and scholars. And she, I'm not expected to hear someone blabber all the time about transitional justice and come to my demolished home and tell me about it. And I think that also about the issue of women empowerment, for example. So it's always happens this way, one way, that all the time we hear about Western scholars or activists teaching or carrying conferences and inviting some Arabs or some brown people and teaching them about how to empower women and how to carry transitional justice. It never happens the other way around. I think we know much more about transitional justice, we know much more about struggle, we know much more about fighting repression and fighting the full repertoire of repression than most of these, comfortable, privileged people who had really not had to, to face the same type of oppression and repression that we have faced. So I think for networking to be effective, and sometimes people say that I'm a reverse racist against white people. I think I'm a reverse racist against the entire system that privileges and white people. But anyway, I think for networking to be efficient and effective, it must work all way around. And we saw this in Brazil, for example, like a Syrian activist. She's called Sara Ajalyaqin. She went to Brazil and met with many leftist and labor activists and told them about the revolution in Syria when they had, when they didn't hear about what was happening, and some of them even supported the Assad regime thinking it was anti-imperialist. And when they heard what she had to say, they actually changed their whole perspective, and they sent from their wages, they sent money to some of the brigades fighting Assad, non-sectarian brigades fighting Assad in Syria. So this is an example of how proletariat solidarity, true solidarity and networking happens. When people, the working class from all around the world, actually understand what happens. And it's mutual. Because just as you support me, I will support you, and I'm capable. And just because I have my own problems doesn't mean that I'm helpless, and just I'm waiting for you to help me. And just at the end, I want to dedicate this talk to Martyr Umar Aziz, a Syrian anarchist, who was killed under torture. He founded the idea of local council, which was an anarchist sort of anti-authoritarian project, which relied on the ideas of Peter Kropotkin and Rosa Luxemburg. Omar Aziz was, what he did, I think many in Europe and in America can really learn of the idea of creating solidarity among revolting cities inside and trying to turn the revolution from just being about protests into a forward-looking approach of how to organize and how to challenge power by creating an alternative system that was the local councils. So, yeah, we will never forget him. Thank you.